What was I thinking? Literally, what was I thinking? I have a freezer full of frozen raspberries. It is like I'm thinking there will be no frozen raspberries in Ireland, and I'm a raspberry hamster. I need to store them for some kind of weird purpose. So I figured I'm gonna make today a delicious raspberry mousse cake, and ideally I'm gonna get rid of 2 of my frozen raspberries packs, and then I just have 1 left, and I have to figure out another recipe for that one lonely raspberry pack. And that raspberry mousse cake will be so delicious. It will not only outshine its glutinous cousins, but will make them jealous and wishing they would be gluten-free as well. So for my raspberry mousse cake, I would like to have a Nutella cookie bottom, because I'm thinking the mousse will be nice and soft, the sponge cake will also be nice and light, and then on the bottom a little bit of crunch I think would be pretty nice. So I still have a little bit of my vegan Nutella tart crust left over, and I'm going to use that for my cookie bottom. And all I have to do is pretty much roll it out. So I normally like my cookie bottom pretty thin, but in this case I do want it to be a little bit thicker so you can taste the Nutella flavor. So I'm gonna roll it out to 0.5 centimeters or 1/4 inch. And when my dough is rolled out and to the thickness I like, I'm gonna use my mousse form as my cookie cutter. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna stab with my fork my cookie bottom. I'm doing that because I want to release the air when the cookie bottom is baking. I'm gonna put now my tart bottom onto a cookie sheet and bake it for about 10 to 15 minutes at 325 degrees Fahrenheit, 170 degrees Celsius. So here's my finished Nutella cookie bottom. And I was thinking what would be very nice is now to have a vanilla sponge cake and then a raspberry mousse. And I'm going to put it together now and show you how I'm going to go about it. And to make my life a bit easier and the video a little bit faster, I actually pre-baked my vanilla sponge cake recipe. And the gluten-free recipe is certainly my video series. Before I sample the cake, I actually want to prepare the mousse. And to prepare my mousse, I actually have to set up first my gelatin. So I'm going to measure 1/2 cup of water and pour it into my pot. I'm going to take 1 gelatin sachet and sprinkle it over the water. And I'm going to set it aside and let the gelatin absorb the water. The next thing I have to do for the mousse is I have to puree my raspberries. And I'm going to use frozen raspberries for it because they're so much easier to puree. Here's my finished raspberry puree, and I certainly want to strain it. I'm thinking when I look at this really rich red of the raspberries, what I can make with raspberries for Halloween. I mean, Halloween is coming up. Wow! I want to add about 100 grams of sugar, and I like to use powdered sugar or icing sugar because it dissolves so much faster. And I'm going to put the raspberry and the sugar aside, and I'm going to finish up my gelatin. Gelatin must have set for like 5 to 10 minutes by now. And as you can see, my gelatin is completely absorbed. It's completely solid. So the next thing I have to do is melt the gelatin. And I melt gelatin pretty much by heating it up. The tricky part is you want to melt the gelatin over a low heat. And you do not want to get the gelatin to a boiling point because then you pretty much break the gelatin. And you have to start all over. The gelatin is now completely dissolved, and you can see it because there are no granules on the bottom of the pot. It's a little bit hard to see because of the foam, so you just have to take my word for it. I'm going to add now 125 milliliters of heavy cream to the gelatin, and I'm really doing it to bring down the temperature of the gelatin. It's still a little bit warm, so I'm going to add a little bit more heavy cream, so that's around 250 milliliters. I'm going to put my finger in to feel the temperature, and it's now room temperature, which is good, because if the gelatin is too warm and I add it to my whipped cream, I'm going to have a lot of clumps. I'm going to whip now the remaining 500 milliliters of heavy cream until it reaches a stiff peak. You can see how the whipped cream holds a little bit of the pattern, the beater, and that is pretty much an indication you reached a soft peak. And I'm going to add now the raspberries and the sugar. And then I'm going to whip it and mix it until the raspberry and the heavy cream are well combined. I think with raspberry it's always tricky to know if it's sweet enough. That's definitely sweet enough. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the gelatin to the mousse, and that will stabilize the heavy cream. I also want to have a few little frozen raspberry bits in the mousse. So I want to strain some of the frozen raspberries. I'm going to let them strain for a little bit while I'm starting to assemble the cake. To assemble the cake, I'm going to use just the cutting board because I have that quickly available. If you have certainly a fancy cake bottom, go for it. And I like to use those silicone mats because it helps the cake from moving around. So here's my Nutella cake bottom. And to glue my sponge cake to the top of the cake, I'm going to use some raspberry jam and spread it evenly on the cake bottom. And I'm going to lift now and place my vanilla sponge cake on the top of my cookie bottom. I'm going to pull the cake liner off and make sure the cake is as much centered as possible. And now I'm going to place my adjustable mousse ring around the cookie bottom and set that aside. I'm going to go back now to my mousse and add, last but not least, the raspberries to it before I'm going to pour it into my mousse ring. And with my spatula, I'm going to give it a quick stir. And last thing I have to do is pour my mousse. And then I'm going to shake it a little bit to distribute the mousse better. Okay, here's my mousse cake. So I'm going to let the mousse and the gelatin sit. It normally takes like a few hours for the mousse to completely set. And I'm going to put the cake into the fridge for that. I let the cake sit overnight and I'm going to take it now out of the fridge. I want to release now the mousse mold, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a small cake spatula and run it along the edges of the mousse form. And then I can lift the mousse form off the cake. I do want to transfer now the mousse to a cake plate, so I need one of those big mega spatula to put my cake on to safely transfer it. And now I'm going to use a little bit of the mint leaves I have outside in the garden growing and use them as decoration for the cake. I'm also going to add a little bit of powdered cacao on the top of it just to give it a little bit of a pattern. And the cake is ready for the party. And the cake was a complete success. People had at least one, but mostly 2 slices. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and if you did, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and check the bell to get notifications about any upcoming videos. And if you have any comments, feedback, ideas which I can try out, please make sure to add them below in the comment box. And I see you next week. Bye!